Hi 1114 students. It's going to be a short video dealing with starter draw or starter amp draw. We're going to use the old style VAT type machines. Now just a plain old regular, we'll show you the snappy now, and we'll put the Sun machine, the old VAT 40 up there. But before I do this, I want to make sure that the vehicle will not start. So I'm going to either kill ignition or fuel. It's preferable to kill the fuel. That way you're not pumping any kind of fuel through the engine and getting it in the catalytic converter. However, sometimes it's a little more difficult to disable fuel than it is ignition. Sometimes, again, in the flat rate world, it's fastest way is going to win. So what I'm going to do is just simply unplug all four of the ignition coils. They're right on the top. They're easy to do. The test is going to be less than 15 seconds each, so hopefully I'm not going to inject much in the way of fuel. Just going to simply unplug them. Again, the key is off. All right, with that done, I'm going to go ahead and make my connections. Now, we're going to make the big red and the black clamps are going to go on battery positive, battery negative, just like they should. We've got something a little bit different on this. We have installed a parasitic drain test on here just so we can run students through doing parasitic drain tests, or this type of parasitic drain test. We'll talk about that maybe in a video later on, but that's on the negative, so it's going to look a little different probably than batteries you're used to. And there's the positive. Now, I can put my amp clamp around either one, positive or negative, doesn't matter. Current is going to leave the battery, it's going to come back to the battery, so it is the same regardless of positive or negative cable. So let's go ahead and make those connections. All right. See, I've got them hooked up. We're 12.2 volts. Battery's undercharged, so really I should charge this battery till it's at least 12.6 volts and then do the test. Otherwise, I'm liable to have inaccurate results. One of the goofy things about batteries and motors are that the batteries in the car can provide way more amperage than necessary to start this engine, and it's a good thing it can, because as the battery ages it loses some of that capacity or capability, but it's still able to crank and start the vehicles for sometimes 5-6 years, maybe a little bit longer. Now, another thing that's kind of goofy about this is that even though it is able to provide the amperage to spin the engine over without any kind of problem, as the voltage of the battery decreases, if it still has enough amperage to turn the engine over to start it, it's still doing the same work, or the watts requirement is the same, regardless of whether the battery is fully charged or not. So the strange thing is that if a battery has less voltage, it can actually provide more amperage to the starter to do that same amount of work. So it's kind of a strange thing. So battery that is low on charge, low on volts, might actually show a higher than normal starter draw. So kind of keep that in mind. I'm not going to worry about this 12.2 now. All I want to do is get you so that you can connect one of these things and do the test. So, all right, now I'm zero as far as the amps go, so I'm going to go ahead and put that amp clamp around one of these cables, and I think I'm just going to go ahead and do the positive cable. It is right there. It's pretty easy to see. So I'll just go ahead and put this clamp around there. Now again, as far as the arrow goes, in this case I really don't care which way the arrow's going. If you want to see positive or negative amperage, okay. Normally the arrow is going to point away from the positive terminal toward the negative terminal, unless of course I'm on the alternator. Then it's going to point away from the alternator towards the positive terminal. Again, I really don't stress the direction of that arrow, because I know while I'm cranking this, any amperage that I see on the machine is going to be my cranking amperage. Okay, so I'm not going to bother which direction that needs to go. So all right, now I'm going to crank. I'm going to ignore about the first second. These electric motors are going to produce the maximum torque at 0 RPM. So if they're making maximum torque at 0 RPM, chances are, it makes sense that they're going to produce or use their maximum amperage at 0 RPM. So we're going to let this motor spin for a couple of seconds or so that we stabilize the amperage, and then we'll read that. We're also going to look at the voltage while we're cranking as well, so hopefully you can remember two numbers. So here we go. But for the most part, I get about 10.8. I'm going to call it about 133, 140, somewhere in that neighborhood. We'll put the old VAT machine on there, and usually that's a little more stable in our reading. So I'm just going to switch over to there. All right, so we've got the VAT machine connected. Again, same connections, nothing different about the way it's connected. One thing though that I have to do a little differently is ensure that it is in the proper range here. So if we take a look, I need to make sure that I go and that the dial there is set for starting. Okay. All right, now test is the same. I'm going to go ahead and crank this with the ignition, in this case, disabled. And as I do so, I am going to watch amperage and voltage. All right, so it's looking about 140 or so, and we're looking at about 10.6, somewhere thereabouts, according to this. So one of the things we're looking for while we're cranking it is the amperage needs to be below what the manufacturer says. Kind of a rule of thumb anymore with permanent magnet motors. V6s, you might be pushing 150, 170 amps maybe. Some of the V8s, you're probably still going to be over 200. At one time, it was considered normal to be about 250 as long as everything was under 300, but those days are kind of gone. Four cylinders, we typically see less than 150 amps. So again, as long as you are not exceeding the maximum amp that the manufacturer calls for, that's a good thing. The other thing we look for is the voltage. We want to drop below, we do not want to drop below 9.6 volts. And now, as far as testing, do I absolutely need this type of equipment to do starter amp draw? And the answer is no. If I have a standalone or a handheld inductive ammeter, I can clamp that around the positive or the negative cables, and I can put a DVOM across the battery so I measure battery voltage that way.